First came the theory of evolution. Then came the theory of relativity. Then came the theory of poker. And now we have reciprocality. Dun dun. That's just too cool. Welcome to episode 4 of the Eightfold Path to Poker Enlightenment. I'm Wayne Lively, and here, as always, with my guru, my coach, my friend, and all-around really neat guy, Tommy Angelo. Hi, Tommy.
Hey, Wayne.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about reciprocity.
Reciprocity?
Right.
Reciprocality.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I tell you what. You do it for me, and I'll do something for you later.
Now that's reciprocity.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't you explain to me what reciprocality is?
Okay, I will. Eventually. Let's talk about reciprocity for a second, because for the first year that I was talking to people about this concept that I now call reciprocality, I called it reciprocity. And it seemed like a name that was an obvious label, but I was never quite happy with it. And then one day I went and looked up reciprocity and looked up all the definitions and looked at usages, and I realized that it has a hint of justice built into the word, like tit for tat. You do this for me, I'll do that for you. That's built into the word reciprocity. It so happens that the concept that we're going to go deeply into this episode doesn't have a sense of fairness or justice. So I went looking for another word. And really the closest word I could come up with that most directly says what this concept is reciprocalness. It's the idea of one thing being the opposite of the other thing. But I thought, well, reciprocalness, just, I don't know, didn't quite like the sound of that, so I went with reciprocality.
Thank you, William Safar. In this episode, we're going to be looking at 5 major areas through the lens of reciprocality. The first is information reciprocality, betting, position reciprocality, bankroll, and tilt. But before we get to that, what the hell is it?
Good question. Reciprocality is in my book, Elements of Poker, and I'm just going to read a few sentences from here that explain it pretty well. In the world of reciprocality, it's not what you do that matters most, and it's not what they do. It's both. And what I mean by that is that with reciprocality, you don't see any decision in isolation. You don't think to yourself, okay, I made this bet and that was a good bet. You think to yourself, okay, I made this bet. Would my opponents have done the same thing? If they would have, then no money changes hands, which brings me to another sentence I would like to read. Reciprocality says that when you and your opponents would do the same thing in a given situation, no money moves. And when you do something different, it does.
Outstanding. That's clear as it can be. In information reciprocality, it is what?
It's as simple as not giving up information in situations they would. For example, let's say I get a pocket pair and I flop a set, play a big hand against a guy, and he sucks out on the river, beats me this huge pot. I shake my head in disgust, mumble something under my breath, wing my cards at the dealer, sit there all frumpy and upset. At this point, the information that has come out of me is that I'm upset. And anyone who wants to has that information, and they can adjust their future decisions accordingly.
It's taking you forever to get this example out. You hate this. You don't want to do this. You're never going to do this.
Oh, yeah.
This is a perfect example of your training in mum poker, in not giving information away. You can't even give the example of giving information away.
Well, yeah, Wayne, that's pretty funny that you picked up on that. I am playing a role here I'm not too accustomed to. So that was me pretending to be really upset at the end of a poker hand and giving away, typically tilted information. So that's day one. That's me, playing it like that. Now, let's say you, Wayne, we'll just reverse roles here for a second.
Oh, this ought to be good because I'm I'm the one that gives
now you
it away.
describe,
You're the one
yeah.
that doesn't. So this is going to be even more interesting as you explaining how I wouldn't do it.
No, I want you to. This is going to be on the next day. We're pretending now. We're rerunning this same scenario. You flop the set, and you play this big pot, and you get beat on the river. And what do you do?
Well, considering that I never take a bad beat, it's going to be really difficult for me.
Well, just pretend.
But I would imagine I would just probably not even nod. I would just look and slip my hand into the muck.
That was unconvincing.
No, that's because it wasn't going to happen, and you know it, and the people out there know it, and everybody knows it. But this is what we're talking about with information reciprocality. In fact, a good example of it is that you do this, and I don't. You know
that's the difference.
That I don't.
So I gain, even though we might never play together. Every time I do something different than someone else would in that situation, where I give up less information, I gain. Not just because I deployed mum poker, but because other people don't. If no one ever reacted to a bad beat, then the act of not reacting to a bad beat would not be profitable. But it is profitable because people react so poorly to them. That's the whole idea. There has to be a point counterpoint. It has to be a differential between the behaviors for the profit to arise.
What was that?
That was chopsticks, reciprocalized.
Okay, you're going to have to explain this one to all of us out there.
Okay, well, I had some fun with the piano this episode. With most topics related to reciprocality, like tilt or quitting, it's very obvious which way that being different than them is the most profitable way, like quitting better than them or tilting less than them. But when it comes to betting reciprocality, it isn't always obvious which way is the improvement until you try it. And I thought I would take some of the famous piano melodies and use those as our inserts this episode and play them backwards. And a really interesting thing happened, which was some of them came out sounding decent and some of them sound really bad. And I had no idea which ones were going to sound good or bad until I did them, which is kind of like betting reciprocality. Sometimes I'll try a betting idea that is different than what other people are doing, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't really know sometimes until I try it.
You were a breech birth, weren't you?
So just what are you getting at with that comment?
You've been going at things backwards since the moment you were born. When I see someone put a chip on his cards, when I know he's going to play it, and he doesn't when he's going to fold it, I've gained information that he hadn't gotten from me.
Right.
That's reciprocality as well, information reciprocality, right?
Yeah, but the thing that makes it reciprocality there is the last thing you said. You have to relate it back to what you would have done.
Right.
If you take it in isolation, you could say, that's just a tell. I got information from him. It's just a tell. Where it becomes reciprocality is when it's you're doing something different than he does. And the combination of the two actions, pardon me?
I'm not giving up that tell.
Right, and the combination of the two actions creates an advantage for you. It's an extremely simple concept.
Yes.
And it shows up all over the place. And we're going
here's another one. My opponent is typing F words in the chat box, and I'm not typing anything.
Yeah.
There again, he's giving information, and I'm not giving anything.
Right.
So it's, I benefit from the reciprocality there.
Yep. And it shows up on the receiving end. The two examples you just gave are cases where you're not giving up information where other people do. And on the receiving end is when goes back to one of the recurring themes of this whole series, which is focus and concentration and paying attention. So if it's at the 2-minute warning of Monday Night Football and there's four guys watching the TV screen while the dealer's dealing, and you're not, you are gaining information that they're not. So there's two sides of the information coin at all times. There's giving information, receiving information. And so when you look at information through reciprocality, you want to be looking for situations where you're not only giving less, like the examples you gave, but also gaining more. And that's where being concentrated and still and quiet, when you can be more still than your opponents and be a receiver, then you gain from a reciprocal standpoint. There's information coming from everyone all the time. It comes from what they say, it comes from what parts of their body they move and how they do it. So you have this giant sea of information moving around the table all the time. And if you are able to receive more information than they do and send less information than they do, then you will automatically win what I call the information war. So anytime you can isolate a situation where you're able to do something different than they do that is profitable, that comes up over and over and over again, it's going to make a ton of money. Now, if you happen to be someone who doesn't believe that sending less information makes money and that receiving more information makes money, then fine, do what you will. But if you do believe that those are profit sources, then the next step is to put effort into receiving more information and sending less information. And those can be done very simply. Because all sending of information involves motion, what you do is you work on moving less. And that means moving your tongue less, moving your eyes less, moving your shoulders less, moving your hands less, everything. And then because receiving information is a direct function of stillness, what happens is by moving less, you not only send less, but you receive more.
I'm going to have to really either A, work on that, or get my prescription for good, solid drugs refilled.
Well, the drugs might help you with the stillness, but they might at the same time hurt your concentration.
Bummer.
It's real simple to just say, okay, if I don't give information and I collect information, that's good for me. And it is. And you could stop right there with the whole topic of information and work on it in that way. Looking at it through the reciprocal lens adds the aspect that why is it profitable? It really explains, like in my article that I wrote called Reciprocality, the cause of profit at poker. I knew that was a fairly ballsy title, but that's really how I feel, because I was looking for, where does the money come from? Is it just from playing good? No, it's from playing differently than they do. If everybody played the same way, nobody'd make any money, whether they played good or bad. So playing good isn't inherently profitable. If I play good and you play good, we're tied.
Right.
We're defining good as just equally good. But if I play good and you play some degree less good, then I make money. So the cause of profit at poker is a differential. There has to be a differential or else no money moves. And so that is the basic concept of reciprocality. And right now we're just talking about it, as it pertains to information. So yeah, giving up little information is profitable. But the reason it's profitable is because other people don't do it.
Fascinating. Okay, let me give you an example. Online, if I use a HUD and my opponent is using a HUD, neither one of us are gaining any information that the other one doesn't have, theoretically.
No, absolutely.
If I'm using a HUD and he's not, now I've got a whole lot of information that he's not getting. I win in reciprocality.
That's a perfect example. And it's important to note here, we're only talking about one aspect of this. Somebody could say, well, what if he uses the information better than you? Or you use the information better than him? Well, that's another topic. That's not what we're talking about. All we're talking here is about the information itself, the existence of it. And someone could say, well, some people play better not using a HUD. I have some clients, some very high stakes clients, who don't use a HUD because they just read the situation and they know their opponents because the player pool is smaller, whatever. They believe they make more money without it. That, again, is irrelevant to this discussion. What we're talking about is information reciprocality, the gathering of information, and the release of information.
Over a period of time, this is going to add up. We're talking bet upon bet upon bet, right?
Yeah, hour after hour. There have been times where I've often thought to myself, during my years when I was just grinding away as a professional, playing 40, 50 hours a week, and I would wonder how much of my profit really comes from my betting decisions, and how much comes from tilting less, or giving up less information, or bankroll management. And I realized that every one of those things is as important as betting. Because I bet different than they do, that creates one profit source. I tilt less than they do, that's a profit source. I manage the money better than they do, that's another profit source. So, we tend to be sort of bet-centric in poker. And it's just not realistic. There are many things that we can do different than our opponents that are as just a viable profit source as the betting differences that we have.
Where did you come up with this concept of reciprocality?
Well, it came from duplicate bridge. That's something I was as passionate about that as I am about poker.
You're probably going to have to explain. Maybe they know what bridge is, but you're probably going to have to explain what duplicate bridge is.
Well, it so happens I've heard that there's duplicate poker now. Have you heard anything about that?
I think
it didn't fly?
I don't think it was.
Well, it was a great idea. I thought of that the first time they started having poker tournaments. Bridge players, it's kind of like Scrabble players and crossword puzzles, and some tournament people get extremely geeked out in their wanting to level the playing field. And it's one of the kind of frustrating things about poker is you have all this luck element in the poker tournaments. Frustrating to the people who would much rather have it be a more pure test of skill.
Chess players.
Chess players, great, thank you. So in bridge, what they've done is they came up with a brilliant way to level the playing field as much as possible by having everyone play exactly the same cards. So the first hand that's dealt is shuffled and dealt, and then everyone keeps their cards in front of them, and they put them in these little slots when the hand's over and pass them on to the next table. So everyone plays exactly the same hands. So in order to score well on a hand at tournament bridge, it doesn't matter whether you scored 1,000 or 100 on the hand. It's irrelevant. All that matters is what you scored compared to everyone else. Let's say you get 4 hearts vulnerable, making 4, and you make that contract, and it scores 620, and you think, great, I made my contract, and everyone else in the room bids to 4 hearts and makes 5, so they score 650. Well, you get a 0 on the hand. You get absolutely nothing because everyone else did a little bit better than you do. So that's how duplicate bridge works. And because I've played bridge, pretty much constantly for 5 years, what happened when I started playing poker all the time is, without even thinking about it, I brought on board the basic concepts of duplicate bridge in how I started analyzing poker hands. So I'd get to the end of a hand, and let's say I had, pocket aces and this hand played out, and I would think to myself at the end of the hand, what would the other guy have done with the pocket aces in this hand if I had had his hand? So let's say I have 2 aces and he has 2 queens, and I win $100 on the hand. Right at the end of the hand, instead of thinking, oh, I made 100, or oh, I had played the hand well, the most natural thing my mind would do was I would just put the pocket aces in his hand, put the pocket queens in my hand, and play the hand out. in imaginary reality and figure out what would have happened. And if it turns out he would have won $100, then the hand was a tie. No money would have moved, no matter what I did. If it turns out he would have won 120 with the aces, and then I actually lost money on the hand. In other words, I didn't get paid enough. If it turns out he would have only won $80 with the aces, then I made $20 on the hand by getting $20 more than he would have. So this came from duplicate bridge, but the funny thing is, at least 15, 20 years of poker went by while I was doing this the whole time, analyzing all kinds of hands, flush draws, every possible thing in this way. And it wasn't until I started writing about poker and thinking of this reciprocality concept almost independently, then I realized, wow, this came from bridge. That's what the seed of it was all the way back then. I didn't even realize it till 20 years later.
So you found a whole new way to keep score.
It is a whole new way to keep score. Yeah, it really is. And I think it's very valuable. I call it reciprocal analysis, where at the end of the hand, you literally reverse the roles, either reverse the cards or the position or both or anything you want to trade places with the other guy, and then project how you think the hand would have gone with the situation reversed, and then you compare what actually happened to the imaginary line of what you think would have happened, and you literally look at the numbers and subtract or add or whatever and see who wins.
So that's how you came up with the concept, and the first concept really of reciprocality was betting reciprocality.
Yes, it was. That's definitely where it started. But I didn't think of it as betting reciprocality. It was just my new way of keeping score. I only started thinking of reciprocality in general in the other topics, tilt, bankroll, just this idea that I have to do something different than they do, that tilting less than they do doesn't make money in and of itself. It makes money because they tilt. So the whole idea of there being this differential that I need to be looking for and create and amplify whenever I can find it, that's the basic reciprocality concept, which did not come directly from betting reciprocality, but then I recognized it as yet another form of it.
So betting reciprocality, it is basically, if I understand it correctly, and I think I really need to, is if both of us have pocket aces and we play it exactly the same way, then neither one of us is going to benefit.
Right. It's a tie.
But if I've got pocket kings and you have pocket aces, and I don't lose my entire stack, and you would lose your entire stack, now I've gained.
Yeah. No limit examples are great to shine a line on, especially in the big all-in type situations.
This is one of the things that immediately hit me when I first, and we, with our funny little opening that we did, that this is what I call the corollary to the theory of poker. Because the theory of poker saying, of course, that if they do something differently had they seen your hand, then you benefit. If you would have done the same had you seen their hand, then you benefit. Yours is actually taking that one step further and saying if you would take their hand and do something differently than they do, then you benefit.
Right.
It's a corollary, actually, to the theory of poker. It takes it one step further.
It is kind of related to that. I could definitely see it that way.
And I know somebody that's going to really hate that.
Who's that?
David Sklansky. If he didn't think of it, it can't be valid. But if you're never going to listen to this, but if you somehow do, David, I apologize. You demand. It really, to me, is the most fascinating thing. And we can take this, and I have taken it beyond. We've talked about this a lot, that virtually everything in life can be looked at through the lens of reciprocality. For instance, food. I mean, we talked about eating before you play. And if you eat a big bowl of spaghetti, you're going to be tired. If the other guy eats a light salad and some fruit, he's done something that is going to benefit him, and you've done something that is going to cause you suffering.
Right. Well, there's a difference. The two of you have taken different courses, and it so happens that you've taken courses that rate to affect your poker performance. So, yeah, you can take reciprocality and expand it to even non-poker things, I guess. But keeping it on poker, you could look at all your decisions, and food's a great example. That there's a difference between you, and it is a difference that is favorable for one person. If you had both eaten the salad, it'd be a tie. If you both eat the spaghetti, it's a tie. But because one guy ate the big bowl of spaghetti and the other guy ate the salad, the guy with the salad has created a reciprocal advantage. What I call mining for reciprocal gold inside any decision that impacts your poker game.
That even comes to sleep.
Sleep is major. Any sort of health aspect is, there were so many years where I wished I was healthier than I was. I was, extremely unhealthy for a long time, but I never thought of it related to poker. I just figured, well, I'm just a decrepit derelict and I'm unhealthy. But if I had ever thought to myself, boy, if I were actually feeling good and sharp like all the time, I would make a heck of a lot more money. That might have been a good motive for me to actually get healthy. What happened was it went the other way around. I got healthy first, and then I realized, God, I'm making a lot more money now.
So you basically graduated from degenerate poker player to healthy poker player.
Yeah. Yeah, and all the times that I was a degenerate poker player, though, I was so, I guess, jealous of the guys that were healthy. They'd go to the gym and they'd come and they'd be all fresh and shaved and looking good all the time, which I was like that, once a week. And they would quit. When I would watch guys, they'd be like, they just play their certain number of hours, whether they're ahead or behind, they would quit. And I was like, man, what amazing discipline, what great control they have. And now that I have developed the ability to do that, I realize that, it's big money difference between door A, door B, about being healthy and being disciplined and not.
All right, what about this? On the river, he bets, I fold. I bet, he calls.
Like you bet with top pair, and he would have called with a bad hand.
Exactly.
But if he would have bet with your top pair, you would have folded.
Right.
That's a perfect case of,
I can't beat top pair, so I'm folding.
right, but because he's a bad player and he pays you off, he would have called. So you picked up a bet, but when you reverse the situation, right?
Right.
That is a case of reciprocal analysis, absolutely. Very clear cut and perfectly used as it pertains to one street. That just kind of goes to show the power of this tool. You can use it just on one street. It doesn't have to be the whole hand, or it could be a combination of streets.
What about if I smooth call the flop, knowing that unless I improve on the turn, I'm going to fold, whereas he smooth calls and calls the turn? That's multi-street?
Right. Multi-street, you could analyze just those two streets. That's the whole point. This is an analysis that you do after the fact. So you can analyze just those two streets and see how it would have played in the imagined reality with the situations reversed. A more classic case might be turn and river combos, where you bet the turn, check the river, all these classic combinations of turn and river. When one of those plays out, you can reverse the hands and say, how would that have gone? So you can do reciprocal analysis of one street, a combination of streets, of a hand. You could even go as far as in a tournament of like the last 5 hands on the bubble of getting to the final table, where you played it just perfect, that combination of 5 hands, and another guy wouldn't have done so well. You might have busted out of the tournament, but you still might have come out ahead from a reciprocal analysis standpoint.
Wow, I never thought of that.
can't make money doing exactly what everyone else does. And so it's like a constant search for what are they doing that I can do differently than them that is profitable. And then what happens is there's a natural evolution that happens sort of within the whole betting culture. I'll give you a couple examples. When in the 90s, when everybody was playing Limit Hold'em, the free card play came up where somebody would bet the flop and then you would raise them in position with a draw. And they would be like, oh, I got raised. I just call. And then the turn would come and they would check with their top pair or whatever. And you would check, you have the option, but you could check behind and take the free card with the draw and go all the way to the river. So what happened was that play, because it was so powerful and so profitable, the reason it was so profitable is because nobody was doing it. And then as more and more people started doing it, a counterplay came up, which is the person who bets out with the top pair
would re-raise.
Exactly. Would re-raise and bet the turn. And so now the person who was going for the free card play ended up paying more to get to the river with the flush draw after they missed the turn. So these strategies and counter strategies are a perfect example of basically reciprocality in action. Somebody starts doing something that other people aren't doing that happens to be profitable, and because it works, other people start doing it, and then there's a tipping point where a whole bunch of people are doing it, and now because there's enough people doing that one thing, the next counter strategy arises naturally. An example in the modern no limit world is the 3-betting pre-flop in was referred to as light, meaning lighter than people used to. Words like light are completely subjective and mean different things to different people at different times, but we know what that meant when people started saying, okay, 3-betting light has become profitable. It's profitable because A, people weren't doing it, and B, people didn't know how to react to it yet. And so now there are other counter strategies that are coming up. It's affecting how people make the first raise, or people are 4-betting or whatever. It doesn't even matter. It just shows that this concept of looking for what people aren't doing and examining whether or not it's profitable in betting is reciprocality in action.
A few nights ago, I was playing online and I got Queen 10 offsuit. And I laughed, and I thought to myself, it's a good thing that I'm not playing live, because people would look at me like I'm crazy, because I'm laughing about this being Tommy Angelo's favorite hand.
Oh, it's a beauty. I love Queen 10 offsuit.
Why is it your favorite hand?
Well, it is the hand I do believe has made me the most money over the years.
Now, you're going to really have to explain this one.
In other words, how could it make more than pocket aces?
Absolutely.
Well, here's how. It all depends on your perspective. When I get pocket aces, let's say I raise before the flop, you could say, well, that was a positive EV play. But when you get pocket aces, you raise before the flop, and you gain exactly the same positive EV. So from a reciprocal standpoint, neither one of us makes money when we raise before the flop with pocket aces, because we did exactly the same thing with exactly the same hand. So now let's say I get 7-deuce offsuit, and I fold. And you get 7-deuce offsuit, and you fold. Same thing. We didn't lose anything with 7-deuce offsuit. We didn't win anything with 7-deuce offsuit. We broke even. So from this perspective, the hands that make the profit are going to be the hands that I play differently than other people in a way that's profitable. And if we move in from pocket aces and move down and come up from 7-deuce, we hit this range of hands like King 10, King 9, Queen 9, Queen 10. These are the hands that are played most differently by most people, and most importantly is how they play before the flop. Because the biggest difference between how a hand can be played is whether it's folded before the flop or not. And so if you were to look for what hands are folded by some people and not folded by other people, it's in that Queen 10 range. And so that's why I believe that Queen 10 and the hands near it are the hands that I've made the most profit from over the years from a reciprocal standpoint. Okay, Wayne, so far, every time we start one of these segments, you've gone first. And since the name of this segment is Acting Last, I'm going to go first. I'm going to let you go last.
Wow, this is a switch.
It is. I'm going to play this one from out of position.
And you're going to find out how difficult it is to play first.
Oh, I know exactly how difficult it is to go first. That's why I fold the blinds all the time, you moron. Okay, acting last. Well, the
Okay, I'm going to let you off the hook. I'm going to go first.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you.
So, we're going to talk about acting last. Now, earlier we had talked about position is either being last or not last.
Right. You can think of there being two positions, last and non-last. Yeah.
Let's go into it further through the lens of reciprocality. How strong is acting last?
It's strong. It is so strong that I felt compelled to come up with a little metaphor about it, which is that acting last is like taking a drink of water, in that you don't need to know why it's good for you to know that it is. And that even if you don't know it's good for you, the benefits are the same. You're always going to benefit from being last, even if you don't know anything about it. Even if it's your very first hand of poker. The act of being last is a fundamental advantage in all poker hands on every single street.
Even for somebody that's never played the game.
Yeah. Now you could say that some people utilize being last better than other people, but that's no different than just saying some people are better poker players than other people. I'm not talking about poker skill here. I'm just talking about the fundamental fact that being last is always better than being first. So if you're a terrible player and you're still going to lose money anyway because you're a terrible player, well, you still gain a benefit from being last to act. It's just fundamental.
And we want to act last more often.
We do. We want to lact ass more often.
Okay, so what does this mean as far as reciprocality is concerned?
Well, what it means as far as reciprocality is that acting last is a really, really, really good idea. So we want to do it more often than our opponents. That's the difference. It isn't about whether or not acting last is good or how you play when you're last compared to not acting last. It's just simply a matter of frequency. If you can act last more than they do, you've created an advantage.
So we need to create acting last. How do we do that?
We can create it in a variety of ways. We can create it by playing the button more often than they do, or we can create it by folding the blinds more often than they do. Both of those would have the effect of having you act last more often than your opponents. And how you decide to play in the cutoff and the hijack. If you play more aggressively than they do in those seats before the flop, which will put you in last position more than them. And then even after the flop, let's say you're in a three-handed pot and you're in the middle and the first guy bets out. If you raise and it makes the guy behind you fold, and now you're acting last on the turn and river in a heads-up pot, where if your opponent in that same situation would have just called and let the other guy in, now he's not going to be acting last. So anytime you take action that puts you in last seat more often than they would be in that situation, you've created a positional reciprocal advantage. Wayne, we've been talking a lot about reciprocality, And next we're going to talk about bankroll reciprocality. So, now that you know so much about reciprocality, why don't you tell me what you think about bankroll reciprocality, or what you think it is?
If you take my bankroll, I'll meet you in the parking lot later.
No, Wayne, you're still stuck on reciprocity. This is reciprocality.
Shit.
So here's what bankroll reciprocality is. If bankroll management, and by management I just mean like what you do with your money, where it is at any moment of your life. Those are choices we have. Many, many door A, door B choices. You could have your money buried in a jar in your yard, which is something I've actually done before. You can have it in your pocket. You can have it on the table. You can have it in a savings account. There are many, many places for you to split up your money, and those are choices you make. And other people make the same choices. And there are hundreds of choices that we make of where our money is every day. Well, bankroll reciprocality is about those choices. It's about how you partition your money and where it actually physically exists compared to where your opponents have their money. Got it now?
Oh.
Well, there's more.
Well, there's more.
Oh, there's more. So I like to think of it as there's 4 bankrolls. Every poker player has 4 bankrolls. He has his net worth, which is 1 bankroll, and every player has their poker bankroll, which is simply the portion of their net worth they've partitioned off in their mind or physically as their poker money. And then there's the pocket bankroll, which is the amount of money you have immediately available to you while you're playing poker.
Lint don't count.
What's that?
Lint don't
No,
count.
lint does not count as a
Okay.
pocket bankroll. That's the sign of a depleted pocket bankroll. So an online player, that could mean, let's say you have whatever, $3,000 in the account you're playing on, but you have access to other money that you can get during that session. That would be your pocket bankroll for that session. Money that you have, or if you're playing at the casino, it's literally what you have in the pocket or in the cage, or if your buddy's playing and you got a credit line with him, that counts. It's whatever money is available to you while you're playing. That's your pocket bankroll.
Dave's not here.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's table bankroll, the amount of money you actually have on the table. Of all these reciprocal bankroll decisions, that's a very important one. For example, at no limit, if the 2 best players at the table both have very deep stacks and the 2 worst players at the table have small stacks, well, the optimum would be to have a small stack to guarantee you're going to be getting your money in good basically all the time. That's what I mean by bankroll management, and this is a case where you can have good bankroll reciprocality. So another guy, he might be just as skilled at you as poker, but if he has a big stack on the table in that situation, and if you were in that same situation, you would have a small stack because it optimized your ultimate EV, you've won the reciprocal bankroll battle against him. You've made money by how you managed your money. Pocket bankroll, we're going to talk a lot more about bankroll later in the series when it comes to quitting and also right action. And we're going to talk about stop losses, but keeping a small amount of money in the pocket when you're playing, if that is the best EV play for you because you tend to self-destruct when you get stuck a certain amount. And then let's say you have your twin brother who has the same tendencies to go on tilt when he's stuck, but he keeps a huge amount of money in his pocket bankroll when he plays.
That would be my evil twin brother.
Right, your evil twin brother. You have made reciprocal money against him. And the reason is when you're playing against that guy and you're running good and he's running bad, you have a shot at all the money in his pocket. And because he's liable to go on tilt and blow it all. When the situation's reversed, where he's running good and you're running bad, and you've pre-protected yourself by keeping your pocket bankroll relatively small, you've made money in that situation. This is what we mean by, we're shining the light of reciprocality on bankroll, on how you manage all these different partitions of your money.
Cool. In this episode, we've looked at information, betting, quitting, position, bankroll, and now we come to tilt reciprocality. Why don't you tell us about how you can get a reciprocal advantage through the lens of reciprocality as regards tilt?
Well, all you have to do is tilt less than they do. One of the great things about tilt is that everyone has it by our definition, which is anything that's not your A game. Any performance that's not your A game, we're defining as tilt.
Which would be the C game.
Right, or B game, any game, or A minus game, anything. That's what I mean. It doesn't have to be super tilt. It doesn't have to be emotional tilt. It can be you're just tired or you're unfocused. You could even think of watching TV as a form of tilt.
That
while you're
cocktail
playing.
waitress.
Yeah, anything that takes you off your absolute optimum performance, we're defining as tilt.
Okay.
So tilt reciprocality is anytime you tilt less than your opponent would in the same situation. So you're not watching the exercise program at 6 in the morning, which I've watched many of in my life. Instead of watching that, I'm paying attention to the game. But my opponents are watching the girls in the leotards. So that is a form of tilt reciprocality because we're in exactly the same situation, but I'm focused on the game and they're not. If we look at more traditional emotional tilt reciprocality would be if you take a really bad beat and you tilt, let's say, X, and your opponent, if he had taken that same bad beat at that same time, would have tilted 2X. So mining for gold in the area of tilt reciprocality doesn't mean not tilting. It just means tilting less than your opponents would in that given situation.
Oh, this is where I'm sorry, I'm still thinking of the chicks in the leotards.
Yeah, they're always there, and you know what? They don't age. Because I've been playing poker for a long time, and they never change. Have you ever noticed that?
Wow.
They're immortal.
Donuts. In the old days, and you and I,
We were there.
yeah, ain't that the truth? In the old days, in Las Vegas, the pros would be sitting at a table. It kind of reminds me of Rounders, where they're all sitting around
sitting around waiting
for those two marks to show up.
Yep.
And they would play super tight.
Yeah.
And take turns hammering the marks. Then the internet comes along, and now guys are playing lots and lots and lots of hands, far looser than anybody ever dreamed.
Winning players. Right.
How does this, with reciprocality, how does this go?
Well, that's a great case of just reciprocality in motion and in action. What it shows is that there's no absolute right or wrong way to play poker ever. It's entirely dependent on what other people are doing. And if there's some sort of shift in the general percentage of numbers of people seeing the flop, then there's a possibility that doing the opposite of that will be profitable. And if it shifts back the other way, then it could go the other way. And it shifts not only in terms of the whole body of poker wisdom in general and the way people play, but it can shift within a session, within an hour, within a week, within your player pool. And so you always need to be, that's why being flexible and being adaptive is so critical, because you want to have all the skills available. You want to be able to play extra tight when it's correct to do that, because that is doing what they're not doing, and when that's profitable, you need to be able to do it. And you need to be able to play looser when that is the way to optimize your profit because of how other people are playing. So creating a difference in how you play against the field or the opponents, even in terms of just pre-flop percentage, is a case to constantly be looking for reciprocal gold.
That's the essence of reciprocality.
It is, and it happens all the time everywhere. That's why you hear the classic saying, this is very simplistic, but when they're playing tight, play loose. When they're playing loose, play tight. That saying in itself is reciprocality.
That one works.
Yeah, it does.
We're recording this, we're producing this during what many say is the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Poker could be affected by this, in this tightness looseness thing, that as poker contracts with the rest of the economy, it could go from being super loose to super tight. And this is something that we ought to be aware of and watching for it, right?
Yeah. And I wouldn't use the word super. It isn't necessarily super loose now. And there's still plenty of tight games, but there could be a gradual shift toward tightness. Now, it'd be interesting if that happens. This is one of those things where, scientific correlation isn't necessarily clear. It's like, I heard a guy teaching this, and he said, in developed countries, in first world countries, he said, if you look at the countries that have the most telephone poles per capita, they have the most cancer per capita. This was a book about diet. Mm-hmm. And the point he was making was that doesn't mean that telephone poles cause cancer. So if we happen to notice that poker is gradually getting tighter and there happens to be a bad economy, we can't necessarily draw the correlation. But if there is some connection there, it's kind of irrelevant in the sense that if poker gets tighter, our job as professionals is to just figure out how to beat the game, the current state of the game. One reason it might get tighter is not because of strategy, but because if you think of most of the money in the poker pool coming from recreational players who are using their disposable income, well, as the average amount of disposable income in the country shrinks, then the amount of money in the poker pool will shrink, and it will be shrunk primarily from the looser players, from the recreational players.
I'm trying to get my head around the fact that a poker room is actually a third world country inside a first world country. Tommy, check this out.
All right.
Folding reciprocality.
I like it already.
The other night, this lady and I were sitting next to each other at the table. She's watching this guy raking in the chips. Mm-hmm. And she says, kind of to me, kind of under her breath, I wouldn't have played that hand.
Oh, there's a classic.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have played that hand either. And suddenly it occurred to me, this is folding reciprocality. He is playing hands that I would fold.
Uh-huh.
And he's, occasionally winning, but more often losing. So the money is moving because he's doing something I wouldn't do, and I'm doing something he wouldn't do.
Right. And what you're doing is profitable.
And the lady sitting to my right, nothing really is going to move as far as reciprocality is concerned, because she and I are going to be doing the same thing.
So you're creating a difference, or he's creating a difference between you and him by not folding as much as you.
And we're creating a difference because we're folding hands that he would be playing.
Uh-huh.
So it's folding reciprocality. What do you think of that?
I think it's great.
That was fantastic. That could actually be better than the original one. That is a beautiful example of what you were trying to show with the reciprocality of the melodies.
Yeah, that one came out really well, and I had no idea how it would come out until I actually started playing it.
That was great.
Wayne, while we were on break, I was thinking about this folding reciprocality thing and trying to look at it in some sort of as a pain reduction tool, as I try to think of everything as being. And I think it is. I think there's some ways that this could be used to help cure some poker pain. Because
All right, let me hear it.
Well, if you think about it, as we know, bad beats are inevitable. And we're going to define a specific kind of bad beat, which is when we've waited for a really good starting hand and some guy who's playing, a lot of hands snaps us off. Okay? It's inevitable that that's going to happen.
All the time.
And if we can anticipate that it's going to happen and be more ready for it and less surprised by it, then it won't hurt us bad. Right?
Sure.
It's definitely a painful moment.
Get in front of it.
Get in front of it. And so if we think of just the profitability of this folding reciprocality, you got a guy who's playing 70% of his hands and you're playing 30% of your hands, and you know that that difference is generating profit for you, just a churning ongoing profit, then when the inevitable hands come up where he wins those extra hands that he's basically entitled to win by seeing so many flops, that we should be able to use this as a tool intellectually to have it relieve the pain a little bit. Could you see it working that way for you?
Absolutely. Like I said, get in front of it. If you're already seeing that he's playing a lot of hands and he's laying bad beats on other people, you can anticipate your turn is going to come, and when it does, you can say, nice hand.
You can just say, oh, folding reciprocality. I get more money from folding reciprocality, and he gets the occasional big bad beat he puts on me, but you're going to skip the part where it hurts.
Right. Well, I'm going to get it back.
Yeah.
Folding reciprocality ensures that I'm going to get it back.
Well, it's like they say, you need people to be playing that way if you're going to make money, right? This is one of the classic ways where we try to think our way through the pain, is to say, well, I want people to give me bad beats, because if they aren't putting those bad beats on me, they aren't playing bad enough for me to make a living anyway.
Which sounds really good in theory, but it never works when you're sitting at the table unless your great idea is to anticipate it.
Yeah, just to anticipate it and you're ready for it.
Every single time that you're in a pot with a player who is likely to lay a bad beat on you by playing a bad hand,
be ready for it. Yeah. Just as soon as you get the two kings, anticipate it right then. If our objective is to increase our profit by way of betting reciprocality and tiltless reciprocality and bankroll reciprocality and every other possible reciprocality that we can conceive of, then we must return to the practice that improves everything, which is mindfulness. So what would it mean to call something mindfulness reciprocality and to profit from it? That would mean to be more mindful than your opponents in situations when mindfulness is more profitable than mindlessness. Well, one of the offshoots of mindfulness is focus. And the essential act of mindfulness is stillness, meaning stillness of your mind. And so, if we put our effort and our energy toward focusing, toward returning to the present tense, over and over and over, and if we point our effort and our diligence at stilling ourselves, stilling our body and our mind, by using the ever-available calmer, the absolutely reliable focuser, which is awareness of breathing, then it's assured that we will have done all we can do to create a difference in mindfulness between ourselves and our opponents. And we will know that we can do no more and no better. Mindfulness can be thought of as an inexhaustible fountain, a renewable energy source that we can use to drive the motor that results in better betting reciprocality and quitting reciprocality and information reciprocality and all of the other differences that we can make that make money. So, what is the difference that makes the biggest difference? What's the ultimate reciprocality? Well, as it turns out, it has nothing to do with differences between ourselves and our opponents. And it has everything to do with the difference between how we are today and how we are tomorrow. And that's why this practice of mindfulness is the ultimate place to mine for reciprocal gold. Because what we are really doing when we remember to put more attention on what is happening now than we did in the previous moment, or hour, or day, is that we are generating profit in ourselves and in our lives by making ourselves happier people. So what this means is, if we want to try to take the concept of reciprocality and apply it at its very highest level toward the objective of reducing our suffering and the suffering around us, then all reciprocality should be thought of as being internal.
That's nice.
Thanks.